Joseph, thank you so much for joining me today. It's wonderful to talk to you. And any moment now, you're going to go to this splendid event where Cardinal Muller is going to celebrate the Latin Mass in St. Peter's. Tell me how significant you think this is. I've heard some people say, don't get too excited. This is just a restitution of a rather marginalized custom. And other people say the Pope had to give his private, personal, official support for it. This is semiotically rich. Which do you think of these two interpretations is right?
Well, it's certainly the case that the Pope would have had to agree to this. Pope Francis was certainly involved in the decision to stop the masses that we were having there. I say we because, as the president of the FIUV, Innovation International, I am on the part of the group that organises these events. So I do know a little bit about the inside workings of the thing. So we don't have a document from Pope Francis or a document from Pope Leo, but it's just obvious. This is St. Peter's we're talking about. So these decisions are not made without the Pope approving them. So, well, one question is, well, what did Pope Francis mean by stopping these? I was interested that he didn't stop them straight away after Traditionalists Crusades. We had them for another year after that, but then he did. And that was obviously a signal. And we started hearing things from the Dicastery for Divine Worship that, although it doesn't say anything about this specifically in Traditionis Custodis, they started saying, well, we shouldn't have traditional masses in high-profile churches with high-profile celebrants and things, because that would be promoting the traditional mass. This phrase, promoting the traditional mass, started doing a lot of work around the world in stopping things happening. It's used in Traditionis Custodis, I think, only in the context of parish newsletters. We shouldn't be promoting it through parish newsletters, and it's a rather different matter from promoting it through a Mass in St. Peter's. But nevertheless, that was that. So this is clearly a counter signal. You can't accept the one without accepting the other. So I think people who want to look at the glass as always being half empty, you have to accept the fact that something good has happened, because, yeah, it was a signal by Pope Francis. It was, it did have an effect on the general. It was an example of the general policy which was being rolled out. So now something different has happened. How significant is it? Well, it's not just that we're allowed to have the Mass. We've had that Mass with Cardinal Burke in the past, quite a long time ago. We've had it with bishops, we've had it with priests and Monsignor. It's been more difficult as years of since Traditionis Custodis to get high-profile people to do anything for the Summum Pontificum pilgrimage, although they've worked heroically at this, the organisers, and managed very. But last time it happened, it was a priest, it wasn't a bishop. So that's another significant aspect. We're not just being allowed the Mass, we're being allowed it with a cardinal, not just a bishop, a cardinal, and not just any old cardinal, very well known, very senior, very respected cardinal. So he's shining a very bright light on this event. Now that is promoting it, if you like. So of course it's significant. How significant, what else is going to happen as a result or in tandem with this? Well, that's yet to be revealed. But this means that Pope Leo is not at war with the traditional Mass in any sense. He's perfectly happy for us to have this Mass. He's happy with the people who are celebrating, like Cardinal Burke. He doesn't think that he's a bad person or foolish or anything. Pope Francis, at one point, listeners may remember, Pope Francis made some extraordinary and ungracious remarks about Cardinal Burke, which I won't repeat, but it was very unpleasant and quite unstatesmanlike. But things have moved on. We have to accept things can get worse and things can get better as well.
I'd like to ask you a question, and it's probably a good thing I can't remember the source, because otherwise I'd want to back up my memory by saying, but it was so and so, and it was a private conversation. But the source, who was very well established in Rome said that they overheard a conversation in which the Pope had taken the view that the supporters of the Latin Mass across the world were effectively a kind of fifth columnist group who were determined to do all they could to sabotage Vatican II, and that
Right.
consequently they would be much discouraged in his view. Now, I've met a number of Catholics who live in bubbles who think something similar. Is it remotely possible? So, is it remotely possible that a cardinal and a cardinal of his seniority in Rome could inhabit such a bubble and still be thinking such things within sort of the last, up at least to the point of his election? Um, that's the first question, and then I want to go on from that to talk about what we think he actually might think.
Well, it's certainly possible that a cardinal could think something like that. You may remember Diana Montagne's reporting of the origins of Traditionis Consideres, and she talked about a meeting that had taken place in the Congregation of the Doctrine of Faith, as it was then, in the absence of the prefect. But some other cardinals were there, and one of them said about the Chartres pilgrimage, which that year, which was I think 2019, had reached 13,000 people. It's grown a huge amount since then, but he was worried about this, and he told the other people in the meeting that they were mentally ill.
Wow, wow.
So that is that's a view, as they say.
Mm.
Um, I mean, we could say it's absurd. We can say that he obviously hasn't met any of the people involved, but yes, it's possible. It's
But
possible for people to get themselves into
it
this.
suggests a climate in which such things could be said by high-ranking people who ought to know better but clearly don't, and are driven by a complex series of animae, if that's a plural of animals. But I mean, it's extraordinary that he could say that. So it's not inconceivable that Cardinal Prevost might not have a fully formed understanding of the integrity of people who support the Latin.
Yes, I mean, I've heard conflicting things about what contact he may or may not have had with the traditional mass and traditional people in the past. Peru is not a place with a great deal of traditional masses. It does exist there, but he wasn't particularly favourable to it, as far as I know. But that may or may not affect him. Of course, he's also American. He's experienced of America. He would have a very different kind of impression of it there if he had come across it. But we had this problem with Pope Francis. And I sort of keep talking about him. I know this is old news, but Pope Francis had experience of the traditional mass people in two very different ways. He was friendly towards the SSPX in Buenos Aires,
Mm,
and he
mm.
was quite unfriendly to ordinary Catholics who wanted a traditional mass under Summorum Pontificum in his diocese, and he gave them quite a difficult time. So, what was going on there? Well, Pope Francis playing his little games, maybe, but
Mm.
people are complicated. People have different experiences. Someone fairly experienced, intelligent, educated, knows lots of different people, and especially from an American context. And I wouldn't expect him to be ignorant. He may have specific personal experiences which are pushing in one direction or another, but he's not a stupid man, and I don't think he's ignorant of what's been going on. He would have been reading stuff about it, even if he's not had personal kind of run-ins with anyone. So what he's made of his readings, or what his readings kind of amounted to, we don't know. But
So
yeah, go
at
on.
this point, could I throw in my Crookes interview hypothesis? So,
Mm.
um, as you know, one only has to say something in public to provoke a series of exciting reactions from people who agree with you and who don't agree with you. And so, I've taken the view from the beginning that I like Pope Leo very much. I like the way his mind works. I like his face. I like his tone of voice. I like the way in which I like the clothes he wears. I like the fact that he uses Latin from time to time. There's a great deal to like about him, and none of the signals that his predecessor produced, which cast fairly early shadows across things. So I'm inclined to think well of him. I was greatly surprised at his sort of politicized, liberal, democratic mindset when he equated immigration with abortion. But then, as you said earlier, we're all complex and we all make mistakes. But when he talked to Crooks, uh, I paid him the compliment of thinking you're a man who's going to use words carefully, and you're going to mean what you say. Usually, I mean, there comes a point where people reach a stage in life or intelligence where that applies to them, and it seems to me that applied to him absolutely. So when he said traditionis custodes is complex and there are many narratives and it's going to be difficult to unwind, but perhaps synodality or the synodal process can unravel it. I thought this was a fairly clever way of saying I haven't come in to repudiate my predecessor. That would be a very unpetrine thing to do and would set up all kinds of other problems. Therefore, I need to find another way of undoing what has been done. And I thought he was saying conversations that take place between people will allow a clearer picture of what's really going on to take place. Because one of the problems with what Diana Montaigne uncovered was that so far from conversations, there had been an act of serious propagandizing and misrepresentation, which could only be put right by allowing the truth to come out through conversation. So I don't know if I've given him too much credit, but it's credit I'd like to give. What was your impression of that conversation with Crooks and what the implications might be?
Well, I agree about the synodality thing. I think that well, one could even see it as a bit of a joke, a
Yes,
bit of
I thought it was a joke. Yes,
it's
I
a
loved
bit
it at every
tongue in
level.
cheek.
Yeah,
But oh well, so this is a problem we can solve with synodality. Well,
yes.
why not? No, I'm all in favour of Pope Leo having conversations with people. Who exactly he has in mind, I don't know. I haven't been asked to go and talk to him, but
Well,
I wouldn't
I thought
necessarily
what he
expect
meant.
to be.
I thought what he meant by synodality, assuming it was a joke, was well, I've got more than one problem. The synodal process is another one that's going to have to be dealt with and neutered given its trajectory. I know. Let's solve both problems at once, and use a form of general ecclesial. Lots of people having lots of conversations. I mean, clearly they should involve you, and I hope you get a quiet billet doux when you're in Rome to invite you to slip away to offer a bit of charitable wisdom. We can at
Well,
least pray that you do. But I thought it was setting the context rather wittily for opening the whole church up to have conversations, so that the wide range of views, most of which are affectionate, have the integrity of history, have had the integrity of Catholicism behind them, could make themselves heard.
yes, conversations are hugely important. I think that this remark of the cardinal, quoted by Donna Montaigne, illustrates how people, as you say, can get into bubbles, and they just simply don't know. They don't listen to. They don't meet. Everything, you can be in a situation where everything you know about some very large phenomenon is mediated through commentators, or that have a particular view, or
Mm.
kind of caricature. So yes, and in fact we know, because there is a public record of who he meets in private audiences. He's met Cardinal Burke, he's met Cardinal Sarah. Cardinal Sarah actually came out and talked a little bit about what he said to the Pope, and these are clearly conversations which would have been helping him to understand the phenomenon. Um, I suspect that lay people are not part of what he would, assume that he meant, that by talking to people. He's ahead of this hierarchical church, and he's expecting it to be mediated by cardinals and bishops and what have you. But we can talk to the people he's talking to, and that's maybe good enough. But yeah, these conversations. I mean, Cardinal Burke is a huge assistance to us, because he gets it. I mean,
Yeah,
he
yeah.
spent time with ordinary Catholics who are attached to traditional mass, um, and he's earned their affection because he is nice to them, and they, of course, are extremely respectful of him. And this is true for a lot of bishops. I remember being reported to me a remark of an American bishop, I think, and he says that when he goes to the traditionalist parish, whatever the situation was, maybe it was the Fraternity of St. Peter, whatever, but I'm treated like a bishop.
Right.
So I
Right.
think this is not treatment that he necessarily gets from other places. And I think that, and this also came out in some of the contents of the reports to the CDF, which led up to Traditionalists Studies, which were passed on by Diana Montano again. Bishops saying, if they feel, these traditionalists, if they feel they are part of the family, they can be very loyal. They
The
actually
most,
want to be part of the
the,
church.
the most loyal. I mean, so the
Yeah.
two things I'd like to add. I mean, one is about the stature of Cardinal Sarah and Cardinal Muller, and the other is a personal perspective from somebody recently become Catholic from Protestantism, which I think adds some leverage to the argument for those who don't know it. But first of all, Cardinal Sarah and Cardinal Muller, they are men of the most significant stature. They're both papabile. Uh, is it conceivable? So I'm really asking you to strengthen my grounds for hope. Is it conceivable that two such eminent men, who are older than Robert Prevost in terms of his current, could approach him and say, Your Holiness, this is really a very serious matter which has been badly handled and badly misunderstood. We've come here to put the record straight, and we're sure that you have the experience and discernment to hear us. Surely he does have the discernment and the experience to hear two such eminent, senior, well-regarded cardinals. It cannot be. What I'm hoping to hear is that whatever bubbles existed in the Francis dystopia that the Vatican came, such an injection of sanctity and common sense and eminence must have an effect.
Well, I'm sure it has an effect. Equally, of course, he will be hearing things from the other side of the argument, and unfortunately, there are people, including prelates, who are determined in their opposition to the traditional mass for reasons which are complicated and difficult to dislodge. And they'll also be saying to him, this is a massive problem, and quite what their analysis is of the problem, I don't know. But you see some of their apologists and spokesmen coming up with various things. So he'll be hearing that as well. What is obvious to me is that he's been cautious, and he wants to solve this in a way which upsets as few people as little as possible,
Right,
and that,
that's the leitmotif, isn't it?
yeah,
That appears to be the stamp of his papacy. You hear him say, insofar as one listens to him, in the homilies that he makes and the sides, the official and unofficial, I want to bring the church together in some form of unity. And that means he's going to have to go slowly and delicately because there's an awful lot to be undone and some enormous bridges to be thrown across. So I'm assuming that that's partly what defines the slowness of his approach here, because there's an aspect in me that says, oh, for goodness sake, Holy Father, do not let the idiot in sorry, excuse me, do not let what's happening in Charlottesville take place without some form of remonstration. Do not this needs to be, the brakes need to be put on quickly. And I think I, like many people, don't understand why the brakes are not being put on quickly, unless it's the fact that his whole strategy requires a degree of caution and slowness without which he can't succeed.
yes, and we have to keep reminding ourselves he's not going to look at it in the way that we look at it. We look at this situation in Charlotte and we see, this is a pastoral calamity and these poor traditionalists and so on. But he'll have his own perspective on that. He'll have his own information. He'll have his own, people saying to him, what should be happening. And there'll be Cardinal Roche and there'll be the Bishop of Charlotte and their perspectives. And I don't know what they'll be saying, but it won't be the same. And I think it may be what's happening there is such that in justice, the Pope ought to act swiftly That may be true, but that doesn't mean that he's a less than perfect pope, because all popes are less than perfect, and there's other things going on, and it's well, there's lots of reasons why he might not be doing it, and I maybe people angry with me for saying this, but I'm just saying what's obviously the case. He may be wrong in failing to act, but we just have to live with that, him being wrong to that extent, and hope that his general, the direction of his papacy is going to be stopping these sorts of things happening, because that does seem to be the tone, that he doesn't want to. Well, someone said when he was elected that what people say about him is he doesn't like being cruel to people. He doesn't like people suffering. Well, I mean, this is quite a good test of that. But he can't just, well, he may well feel that he can't just step in and, brush aside things, that process have been going on for some time, advice which has been given by the dicastery for divine worship, and so on and so forth. He may well feel that. Why? Because of a concern about procedure,
Yes, that's right.
continuity,
Absolutely.
and not and avoiding the bruta figura that they talk about in Italy,
Yeah.
this destruction of the character of your predecessors. Because, and of course, this is a massive problem with Pope Francis, that
Yeah.
if you undermine the prestige of your predecessors in a position, you undermine yourself.
Absolutely. One of the things I'd like to ask you about, I mean, so if people are angry with you, that's only because they're choosing partisanship over reality, and I'd
Well,
really
because they're
be
suffering. Now, to be fair to
yeah,
them, they're
no, no,
suffering.
of
I mean,
course,
you know,
absolutely. But so that's true, and I mean, I began this by saying that it's precisely their suffering that moves me to such a passionate defence and a frustration that he's not acting. So we both share that, of course we do. One of the things I heard you say to Raymond Arroyo, which I should have realised, but sometimes one's thinking processes are slower than they ought to be, was that the phenomenon of the crackdown against the traditionalists seems to be limited to America. We don't hear of it happening elsewhere in the world. So, what is going on in America that's producing these awful situations where people are suffering, and where you have bishops apparently full of the spirit of Pope Francis, imposing this document in a way that's really contextually hard to explain?
yes. Well, America, as I we have to keep reminding ourselves over on the other side of the Atlantic, is a very, very large place, and as a Catholic country, it's a very, very large country. Not as large as Brazil, but it's still. I mean, it's got an enormous episcopal conference, and the number of Catholic dioceses is just vast compared with what we're used to in England,
Mm.
or even in Italy, or France. I mean, it's just huge. So um, in England, there's this tradition of the bishops. They kind of have a kind of consensus and stuff, but it's not like that in America. It's so big that you can't play that kind of game.
Mm.
So you have polarizations and different groups and bishops who are kind of part of a kind of family tree of mutual promotion and discipleship and things like that. So someone said 10 or 11 dioceses have cracked down on the traditional mass. Well, that's a lot of dioceses, but it's not a very large proportion of American dioceses.
Right.
So without minimizing what's happened, the significance of what's happened in those dioceses, this isn't the whole of America. This is just very specific places. Now, there are all sorts of reasons why it hasn't happened in the dioceses down the road, including that, they're just on a different timetable. And it may still. But that's one thing. So there are some bishops in America who are very pro the traditional mass, who are still let things carry on. There are some people who've become bishops who've become under specific pressure because of the sensitivity of what's happening in their diocese, and there are some bishops who are clearly ideologically against the traditional mass. So the closure of the Institute of Christ the King Church in Chicago, I mean, that was really shocking. But people would say before that, oh well, East Institute, they own the church. they can't be thrown out so easily. And it's true that you'd have to have a kind of complex canonical process to eject them from the diocese. And you'd have to have really good reasons to do that. Does that mean they're safe? Well, not entirely. So Cardinal Cupich obviously felt very, very strongly. He did something quite remarkable, but nevertheless, within his powers as the bishop, which is to forbid them from celebrating public liturgies, even though they're in that church still. And that's an extraordinary thing to do. And obviously, that comes from a relatively extreme, position on the spectrum of opinion about the whole thing. So these bishops who've cracked down, obviously, they don't like the traditional mass. I mean, it's a thing. There are bishops out there who don't.
No, yes, in the same way we love it, they don't.
Exactly.
Well, whilst we're talking about Supich, can I just try something out on you? Because I find myself I was at a conference the other day speaking, and Bishop Strickland was there, and quite rightly loved and hugely applauded. So the thought of my contradicting him in public is something I really don't want to do. But I've wanted to write about the Supich appointment, and I'm aware that in some pain he's said, "What is the Pope doing? This is a dreadful affirmation of an enemy of the Church." I taken a different view. When I discovered what he was being given, okay, so it's in Rome, it's administrative. Uh, I thought to myself, well, first of all, the Pope's accepting his retirement at 75, which isn't a given at all. So he's removing him. So that's good. And secondly, he's giving him something. Well, that's not surprising. He's a man of considerable influence, and also one can't imagine that Cardinal Provost could be elected without Supich's support. And so there must be some sense of, well, there are debts to be paid, whatever you think of Supich's performance. And thirdly, it may be that it lies at the summit of some cleric's ambition to be given an administrative job in Rome. But I would have thought, if you'd spent your time as a priest and bishop and archbishop, becoming an administrator for the last years of your life, I mean, I thought it was a sideways move, which paid a few debts, maintained a degree of political neutrality, and allowed the situation to move on by appointing somebody else that was really quite canny, diplomatically speaking. So I'm sorry that Bishop Strickland is so wounded by it, and I'm not confident enough in my own judgment to say anything publicly. But what was your view of the politics that lay behind such a significant act?
Well, I don't have any inside information, so I'm looking at it like you from the outside, and I'm inclined to agree with you. It's a dignified retirement role, but I don't think it's giving him more influence or power in the church than he would have had anyway. And I just refuse to get worked up about that kind of thing. Why not? It's the thing is this, the suffering I've referred to. Bishops have suffered this as well as lay people and priests, and after a while, there's a constituency builds up who wants revenge, not just
Yeah, for sure.
It's something which we all have to take a step back from our emotions about this
Yeah.
and think about what is going to help our situation. And the other thing that people want very, very badly is the Pope to stand up and make a whole lot of statements about theology, which will clarify and reaffirm the faith in the way that they like. And I probably agree with them, about what they want. But that is not going to happen in a quick and easy way. It's going to happen, if at all, in a complicated and drawn out, subtle way, which is going to be very frustrating. And I don't necessarily disagree with the people who say the Pope really ought to make it all clear and neat and tidy, because it's for the good of souls. Okay, but he's got other considerations, and I know that good of souls ought to be perhaps the only consideration. But actually, all popes, it's a political role. They are governing the church. I used to say this about Pope Francis, and I'll say it about any pope, that he governs the church, and part of that is to deal with personalities and power bases and constituencies, and also, of course, the secular governments. When Pope Benedict issued Summorum Pontificum, he got a phone call from Angela Merkel.
Good grief! Seriously?
Yeah. That's in the public domain, and she was worried because she was this whole business of the prayer for the Jews and all that stuff. That the link had been made in her mind about this. She rang him up, and he had to explain himself. And in fact, he wrote a new prayer for the Jews, and we got over that problem. But it's the Pope, was it Clement VIII or something, who suppressed the Jesuits, and people say, well, it was a political move because he was under this political pressure. Well, yes, it was, and it was very, very unjust. But maybe it was necessary, because
Yes,
he was trying to protect the operation of the church in, all these different countries. And he threw a bone to the persecutors to allow the church to continue to save souls. And maybe you do have to make that sort of sacrifice sometimes.
Well,
it's very unpleasant if you're the victim.
I'm reminded of the Second World War and the appalling things that have been said about was it Urban? I'm so sorry, I forget my Pope sometime. Who was the Pope in charge in the 1940s?
Well, it was Pius the 11th up to the war, and then Pius the 12th.
So Pius the 12th during the war, and the fact that the archives show that one of the reasons why he didn't speak out was because every time he spoke out, the Nazis wiped out another town, village, or group of Jews, and so he had to find a way of working behind the scenes, which he did. But if it's behind the scenes, then the public don't know about it, and the public are underinformed, and so his reputation was severely tarnished precisely because he did the right thing in the right way at the right time, but people didn't have access to information.
Well, I think it's fair to say, it's acceptable for people to take the view that he did the wrong thing. I think what we need to be careful of saying is he wasn't acting on behalf of the Nazis. He was acting to protect the church. He wasn't. He was acting against the Nazis in the best way that he could. Maybe he made an error of judgment. Now, this is open. Now, there are some people who pass through this world in a very innocent, in a way, who keep themselves as St. Paul says, unspotted from the world, and they would be the ones who just, I'm going to say it anyway. And everyone else in the church desperately tries to keep them away from influential public offices, because essentially the Catholic tradition is that this kind of this innocence, which is very commendable in many ways, actually, that is, we want more than that in relation to public office. We want the cunning, the intelligence, the ruthlessness, even. So, in a different context, St. Therese of Lisieux said about a confessor, she said, give me a proud theologian and not an innocent fool. We don't want an innocent fool as a pope. Give me someone who is ambitious, intelligent, cunning, ruthless, but sees his own advancement in terms of advancing the church.
So I'd have expected that from Therese of Avila, but never from Therese of Lisieux. It only shows how profoundly saintly wise she was, because that's exactly right.
Therese of Avila. It was Therese of Avila.
Oh, thank goodness. Okay, well.
Sorry, I got my Thereses muddled up.
No. Well, I just thought, for the little flower to say something as ruthless and pragmatic as that, how did she get that? Avila, absolutely spot on. That's what I'd expect from her. Anyway, so my sense of geographical historic proportion is restored, even though my admiration of Therese of Lisieux has not gone up as far as you were about to make it go. But anyway, but that's right. So the gifts of private pious spirituality are very different from the ones needed to govern the church. I just, before I forget, what I wanted to do was to offer my own anecdote. I mean, you'll have heard this before, but I just think the record ought to have it. Just I wrote something the other day for a magazine, and only to be told by the editor that he still had Bob Prevost's old email. And since I was writing nicely about the Pope, he was going to send Bob so just in case this gets to
Oh my
Bob.
word!
I don't suppose it will, but just in case this by the same route makes its way to Bob's table. Bob, God bless you. You know we're praying for you. Meanwhile, one of the things that slowed my conversion to Catholicism down was the convergence of Anglican liturgy with Novus Ordo. And in fact, I mean, I don't want to stress you terribly. I got up to some awful liturgical things with the permission of Cardinal Murphy O'Connor, whom I knew, and it's another story, and I won't make your hair stand on end. I so regret what I thought at the time was a triumph, but it was precisely the strong similarity, almost identical liturgical similarity between the Anglican liturgy and Novus Ordo that made me say, well, why would I want to become a Catholic? The most important thing is the liturgy and the Eucharist, and as I hadn't yet come across the Eucharistic miracles and didn't have an objective means for establishing the truth to different theological judgments, there was too much that was the same to even begin to think of paying the enormous price that one pays for moving from the independence of an established life within a different denomination to giving everything up. So when I came and experienced, well, that's the other thing. People don't. In order to become a Catholic, I had to experience the Mass, which I did because my wife was becoming a Catholic, and so our private deal was that we would go to the Catholic Mass first, and then the Anglican Eucharist. And going to the Catholic Mass had a profound effect on me. And I suddenly realized I'd been pontificating for 40 years about an experience I'd never actually had, because you go to an occasional ecumenical event. Most people can count the numbers of times they've been to a Catholic Mass from outside the church on two hands. But actually, in a sustained way, to be in the presence of the Blessed Sacrament, to be of our Lord really there, these things have their own profound effect. But only when I went to the Latin Mass properly did I say, oh my goodness, this is theologically, spiritually, emotionally, historically, everything I've been longing for. And only I didn't know it because it was confined to history books or photographs or ancient pieces of video. But suddenly to be in, and particularly in the context where everything's got out of balance, and you and I, you quite rightly have asked me to rethink my transcendence and immanence narrative, and that's absolutely the case. But nonetheless, the one needs to find a way of saying that, if you like, sort of the low-key, anthropocentric, subjective, community-based emphasis of the Novus Ordo has gone so much too far because it is dislocated from the perfectly proper liturgical responsibility of the church to offer the sacrifice to him, not to reflect on how we do our liturgy in community. So one of the very important reasons for being a supporter of Latin Mass is that I think there are a lot of Anglicans out there who, if they had any idea of the power, the effect, and the theological profundity of the thing itself, and could experience it, would suddenly go, heavens above, I've been living off slops for far too long. I need the real thing. So I simply want to add that anecdotally, because although I know other people have said it, I think it needs to be, there needs to be some public registration of it.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting, because it's as a Catholic, of course, I don't know how it affects other people. On occasionally you do read these testaments, but one of the things that's often said is that Archbishop Bugnini said this, that he wanted to remove the obstacles. So he seems to have done the opposite.
Yes, exactly.
Of course, that does happen sometimes. You try to make things easier for someone, but actually it's those difficulties which turn out to be sometimes.
Unintended consequences, yes.
Well, it's yeah, the very difficulties. And in fact, I would say this about the traditional mass in general, that there's something very counterintuitive about the way it works. That the things which are most difficult about it are the things which are also most valuable about it. The
Mm,
fact that it's difficult to understand, is that a problem? Well, no, actually, it's part of why it works.
mm, mm, mm.
So it's the fact that it's a sacred language and it's a mysterious and so on. So we have to. Well, this is a lesson for us all to be respectful of the spiritual tradition of the church, um, not despite, but because it wasn't created by a committee, because it's organically grown up under the hand of providence, that it has a way of engaging with human psychology, which is counterintuitive but actually effective.
Well, so effective, of course, that it's produced all the saints.
Yeah,
I mean, there are, one can list pages and pages of arguments. One of the most profound one was this: that one's praying the same liturgy as, then you pick your favorite saints. St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Thomas More, Thomas of Becket, Augustine, whatever, wherever you want to go with it. It's the idea that we can't have access to being a Catholic liturgically is quite extraordinary. And whatever aspirations Bugnini may have legitimately had ecumenically, again, one of the things that wasn't clear in the 1960s, it wasn't even clear to me at the turn of the millennium, but it rapidly became so, is that the Protestant experiment has run out of steam, and the whole basis of ecumenism suddenly disappears from under your feet when you discover that the person you're trying to, or the body, or the concept, or the historical community you're trying to make a rapprochement with, is actually sinking down the slope out of the grip of Christianity. So problematic was the foundation upon which it was built. But that's really, I think, like so many things, only become clear in the last 20 years. But it has become clear, and it ought to be part of the lexicon of arguments that the Latin Mass community present to the rest of the Catholic Church.
that this yes, well, of course, it's a complicated one, and in one that we're not engaged with personally, generally speaking. But it's interesting though that, I mean, every generation of Anglicans who've become Catholics have said the same thing, and I wonder whether this is, well, one thing that's happening is that each generation of Anglicans who are seeking a more high church understanding of the church and of the sacraments, um, they have to discover for themselves that their understanding of Anglicanism is actually not right. So I think, I mean, this is a process that Newman went through. So Newman,
Mm.
looked at the church. Oh well, we've got bishops, we've got sacraments, we've got liturgical books. Well, I mean, this is a church, isn't it? And this is how we can understand these things. But actually, Anglicanism is not. It's not equivalent to the Catholic Church. It's difficult to compare like with like, and it's
No,
difficult, of course. Yeah.
but the propaganda within Anglicanism is not just that it's equivalent, but it's superior to. It takes it takes all that is good within Catholicism and then adds to it.
Yes.
But
Yes,
the
of course.
problem.
But it does so on the basis of a different understanding of what the church is.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the difficulties that I had in my own head that I then have to try and replicate effectively outside is because I've got so many Anglican friends still who are sympathetic to the idea of becoming Catholics, but the price is too high. But more importantly than that, the false ecclesial and historical narrative that has been used to shore Anglicanism up is very powerful, and it's extremely difficult to undo. You have to go back to first principles. As Newman, I mean, the usual answer is we have to start reading the Fathers, and only when you start reading the Fathers and begin again in the second and third century, make your way through, can you begin to undo the knots. It's Lewis's thing about maths requires you to go back to where you went wrong, and
Yeah.
actually, I think where Protestantism went wrong was in its amnesia about the Fathers, and it's picking and choosing the bits that it wanted to justify itself, without having an understanding that actually the fathers were supremely Catholic from the very beginning, and that the Protestant experiment illegitimately appeals to them for justification.
Yes, yes. Well, I leave this to the
Another
patrologists.
conversation, Joseph. We were
Yeah.
Well, I've used a lot of your morning up. Thank you very much indeed. It's been a really helpful. I've no idea whether this will make its way into Bob's in train. I strongly doubt it. but thank you very much for joining in the conversation, and above all for helping clarify the situation amongst the Americans, because I thought that was really very useful indeed. So thank you. A lovely conversation. I'm very grateful.